I have this perpetual thing from the record store days where we always got new music. And once I didn't have that job anymore, I was like, oh my gosh, how do I get new music? How do I know what's new? How do I find the stuff that I'm going to like? So when I'm tired of doing that, I just go back into the crates and I listen to 311's Blue record. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am not.
There's a line in one of the songs that was like, well, it was 1989. I was cocaine and Jim Beam, but now it's 95 and I'm ginseng. And I was like, that is so 1995, like ginseng.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That or echinacea or any of those wonderful.
That's right. Echinacea. Yeah.
Telling time with herbs,
Telling time with herbs and get rich quick schemes.
It's good stuff. There are still probably tons of people who swear by that stuff. It's almost that placebo effect where, if you develop a pattern and you kind of do that and it works, you don't want to break the pattern, right?
Right.
And I fully respect pattern recognition and pattern development.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same kind of superstition that I guess, professional athletes might have if they don't wash their socks because they're on a winning streak or don't shave or stuff like that. It really does affect your kind of mental outlook. And that's actually one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is writer's block, because that's all mental.
Yeah. And I succumb to those patterns and those superstitions. I might be an atheist, but I sat the bench in baseball. So I've got baseball superstitions like you wouldn't believe.
There's a comfort in it. It's like, well, I do have more control than maybe I thought I did. Or at least if I don't, this pattern or this process gives me at least the appearance of control, and that makes me feel better. So I don't know. Either way.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about writer's block because I know you and I were going to talk about it today in the corner booth. And, I was trying to figure out, like, when have I had writer's block and when has it, when have I successfully cracked it? I can't really remember, to be honest. I know I've had it a lot, and I know I've broken through it a lot, and I've never really kind of sat down and tried to figure out how to break it. So when I did this the other day and kind of said, okay, what did I do? I came up with like 4 basic food groups for breaking writer's block. And the first one was writing tangentially. And what I mean by that is, have you ever picked like something that isn't part of the main narrative and it might not even like make it into the story, maybe a character background or setting description or something like that. And you're like, well, I'm just going to do this because at least it's like in that world, and I'll just start doing this and maybe that'll help me kind of push into what I really want to be writing about.
I've told you before, we've talked about this a lot, where I had writer's block ever since I graduated from college in 96 up through like 2015. Like I just couldn't, I had put myself in such a weird mental state of, I have a degree now. I shouldn't have to do the work of editing, of rewriting. I should be good at this, right? And then I was terrified that what I would write wasn't great. So I spent 20 years, starting little stories, thinking I had something, and then reworking the first 2 paragraphs of a story for the span of like 2 years. Like I was horrible at it. So for me, writing tangentially I love doing that. I love trying to figure out other things that would happen. I'll just kind of get my head out of it, do one of the things that I hate the most, which is take the story that I'm working on that I'm having some trouble with and put it aside. I hate doing that.
Yeah.
And I think I hate doing that because I feel like at this point in my life, I have so little output. I'm always stressing about like, let me have more works done. Let me try and, make something so that it can be finished so I can move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So I hate putting things on the shelf because that means, that's another unfinished project. But, putting a story that I'm having trouble with, putting it on the shelf, and then just sort of letting a couple days go by, and maybe I'll be walking the dog. And I got to be honest, I have had more of my breakthroughs walking my dog, which might be my number one solution for writer's block. Because I'm out there, I'm not doing anything, and then suddenly my mind kind of wanders, and then bam, I think of the word, I think of the sentence, I think of the situation. Yeah, so writing tangentially, just trying to do different scenes with the same characters or the same situation really, really helps me a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always considered that to be wasted time, and I think that was wrong-headed of me for a long time. where it's like, well, this isn't something I'm actually going to quote unquote use. So like, why am I putting the time into it? I remember, my peers used to say, well, write what the character would have for breakfast. And I'm sure you've heard that before. I hate that exercise because I don't I don't care what he had for breakfast or what she ate for breakfast. And what they're really getting at, obviously, is, try to learn who your characters are more so that you can inhabit their skin more effortlessly, so that when you're presenting or when you're placing obstacles in front of them, it isn't as much challenge or effort to figure out how they would respond to those obstacles.
Yeah.
So like, I get it. And that's a lot of words, so it's easier to just say, write what they would have for breakfast.
Yeah.
But I can't stand that because it's irrelevant to me what they would have for breakfast. What's more relevant is if they put themselves, like, what's the worst day of their lives, right? Right? The worst experience this character has ever had in their life, even if it's not going to make it into the narrative. And I think that makes a lot more sense because at least then you are dramatizing. You have some conflict going on. It's not just, well, oatmeal with raisins. It's like, come on, what are we doing here? I like what you're saying about taking a walk. The 4 basic food groups that I have, that falls into the recharge your brain food group. But yeah, basically the 4 food groups are writing tangentially, which is just sort of tricking yourself into writing about something that is somewhat related so that you can more easily kind of step down the stairs into the pool rather than try to cannonball in. Banish your stress, right? Which is not feeling like you have to have this perfect iteration in your first draft, which was always my problem. My friends and I used to talk about how I would bleed out the words, right? They would just come very, very slowly.
Yeah.
And the risk there is if you bleed your fiction onto the page, then you are very, very reluctant to change it because it was so difficult to get it out in the first place. And you were trying to sort of place it in this perfect calligraphy and this perfect pattern and symmetry that you can't move a word, and then you can't edit if that's the case. So you really are setting yourself for a lot of failure, if you do that. And that third food group is that recharge your brain, and one of the ways to do that is to go take a walk, and I think you're absolutely right. Walking the dog is a perfect way to do that because sometimes that long walk, it gives you the permission to not focus critically on what you're doing, and your brain, because it can take a little breather, is going to try and make those connections anyway. And I'd really like to talk with you about some of the experiences you've had with that. The last one is curating your writing experience. And this is the one I used to do a lot, which is kind of creating a happy space for writing. I used to write a lot in coffee shops, right?
I did. Man, I was living that sort of, romanticized ideal of coffee shops. And I kind of got out of that when I realized that I had spent the bulk of my time in coffee shops. Writing in my journal, and it essentially boiled down to why doesn't fill in the blank like me like I like her? Why don't I have any money? And why aren't I doing the things that I want to do? And that was just essentially me avoiding asking, trying to find reasons outside of myself for those problems, which essentially in the end, spoiler alert, was just me. I've got a whole line of journals that I started from like 1992 or 93 when I first started doing it. And then they go all the way to like 2015, 16, 17, where the common denominator in all of that writing was, Tim, you're an asshole.
See, I just wouldn't write that down. I always thought that. But I wouldn't write about myself, not about you. I always thought that I just wouldn't write it down. But you had the courage to actually write it down. That's interesting.
Well, it's funny because and I appreciate that you called that courage, but I think it really, the Beastie Boys call it owning your shit. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's not the title of their book. I think I heard them say it in an interview once. And so it just sort of really struck a chord with me, as does everything else Beastie Boys do. And it wasn't until I started to honestly ask myself, hey, wait a minute, why did I have this thought? Or why did I have this thought? And try to wrestle these things that I had been thinking for, at that point, like 40 years, wrestle them down on the page, and then really, truly get honest with myself and find all the ugliest parts of myself. And that was really, really helpful because not only did that cure a lot of patterns that I was repeating in my life, but it also really helped me address my writing so that I could sort of do more writing honestly, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And I think that's what I'm learning every time we've talked over the last, I'm going to say 30 years. Yeah. Coming up on 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I learn is that the only way to write well is to be authentic. And it's a very, pat thing to say, but it's absolutely true. And so for the first 20 years that I've known you, I probably was not writing tangentially, but I was actually writing to avoid, truth and things. And that's why the writing was not great. Like the sentence structure was good and, it flowed and it felt poetic and like all the stuff that you can do without actually saying anything, that was all good. But the people and what they were doing and whether it was interesting or relevant, largely it was irrelevant. And so only recently, with enough distance and enough courage I'll use the word again, courage to kind of talk about things that are uncomfortable, and potentially, take real people that I know and kind of merge them into a character that's not fully recognizable, but is inspired by real people. Only now am I really able to start doing that. And those works those drafts are really coming along much, much better. They feel like actual stories.
Yeah.
And the few times that I accidentally told the truth, I got published. So and I didn't learn from that. I'm like, oh, great. I can go back to doing, this comfortable avoidance. And I was perplexed for decades as to why it wasn't working. So
one of the other things that I like about the situation, or take maybe the character that you're writing about and putting them in different situations, I believe that the story sometimes that comes out of U2 headquarters, because I'm a huge U2 fan, is that they will work on a whole bunch of songs, and it turns out that when they're working on another song, there will be a piece, maybe a bridge or maybe a hook or maybe a bass line that fits into another song. And I'm sure that, obviously I think that U2 is the end all and be all of bands and they're the only ones that do this, but I'm sure a lot of bands end up doing this, but that when they kind of work on other material, they discover material that can go into older works that they're also creating. And I think that that's really great with tangential writing, is if you have, like, let's say a character or a situation and you're trying to write about them from a different point, or, or the worst experience that they've had, that could lead to other works. And I think that that's a really important thing about tangential writing.
Yeah, the spin-offs in television show that.
Yeah.
When you've got let's just go way back. I'm going to date myself here, but Rhoda. Do you remember the show Rhoda?
Oh my gosh!
It was a spin-off from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, but it was a minor character, made such an impression on the audience that they decided to spin it off and make their whole show. And so I'm sure that the writers went into that just trying to create a funny foil for Mary Tyler Moore, and it turned into its own thing. So I think that's an example of writing tangentially, and I'm sure you could trace that for the last 30, 40 years in different television shows that have spun off to other shows where an interesting character, creates a whole new storyline and a whole new opportunity for drama. But writing out of sequence is the one that I was trying to use most frequently. And I thought that was a really clever way to trick my brain. You read a novel in sequence, and the items of the story, like the actual plot, doesn't have to be in the sequence that they occurred. So the writing of it doesn't have to be in the sequence or the order that it will be presented to the reader. And so that was a big kind of aha moment for me in my 20s, that I could give myself the permission or the freedom to write whatever I was interested in at the time. And it felt a little bit like procrastinating, but it was purposeful procrastination. And so that was a really good way to get out of my own way. Because really all of this is just about getting out of your own way. I find that when I think things to death, that is when they die, right? And so I'm sort of hyper-focused on a thing, and I really want to make it as good as it can be. And it's almost like that intense sunlight that I'm shining on it is almost like that magnifying glass, and the idea is the little plant that's burning, in the center of that focus. So I find that just kind of taking that away can be a relief to everyone involved, and you can really find some good energy there. So that's another one. I
used to hate rewriting and editing, and I think it's because as I continually talk about my fear of writing for such a long time, I think it was because I was afraid of doing the work and finding out that I wasn't very, very good. And so editing, it was sort of like, so instead of course, admitting that, I was just like, I don't like to edit. This is how it is. Enjoy it. Maybe you just don't understand it, all that sort of horse shit. And it really is something that I really enjoy now. It's just feels like it's just trying to like carve and carve and carve and whittle and whittle and whittle away. So, sometimes I just love sitting down with a laptop, throwing on the Spotify and just rewriting the whole thing and writing tangentially from the point, like, let's cut out this paragraph and start from these two paragraphs and just start writing in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, making something into an editing session can be a really interesting way of validating that the story's going in the right direction anyway. I used to do too much of that. That was my fault. So I would kind of rough out maybe 1,000 words of a short story, and it wouldn't be a full movement yet. And really, at that point, I think what you're supposed to do is finish the movement, right? Like, even if it's garbage language, and even if it takes way too long to get to that point, you do need to have a completed movement before you should go back and start editing. But what I used to do is like pause and go, well, I like where this has gone so far, so let me go back to the beginning of it and start to edit this and make it really pretty. And then I'll go forward and finish the draft. So I'm sure that other people have had this thought as well. And what would happen to me that would really derail my process is I'd go back to the beginning, I'd really start to hone, and that 1,000 words might turn into 200. Like, for real.
Yeah.
And then you feel like, I really have not made the kind of progress that I thought I had made.
Right.
And now I have so much further to go. Like, if it's a 5-to-1 ratio, I'm going to have to write 5,000 more words just to get enough to keep in the story. Yeah. I don't know if I want to do that. And then all of a sudden, your brain has closed the door on that idea. Like, that is over. So I do think that making something an editing session is helpful in writing tangentially, but not to do that full-blown edit, because you can kind of close that door. Instead, it's helpful if you leave something unfinished with the intent to go back to it and start again. Have you ever done that, where you kind of purposely stopped a scene midway going, I know exactly how this is going to finish, and when I come back, I'm just going to go ahead and finish it, and that'll kind of carry me, the momentum will carry me into the next scene?
Yeah, there was the way that I busted out of my 15 plus year of writer's block was I had been always wanting to write this movie script. Go from working at a record store and maybe bartending at TGI Fridays to suddenly writing an Oscar award-winning science fiction movie. Yeah, it's super simple. But one of the things that really, really helped me was that I was like, I have to finish this. I have to finish this. I have to finally put myself in a position where I'm finishing a piece of work. And I felt like once I finished something that I could say had a beginning, middle, and end, then it was like I got over my own problems. One of the things that I did in that spot was when I came to a point in the script where I knew what was going to happen next, I would stop when I was excited about what I was going to write next. So even if I got to sit down for like 5 minutes and like wrote a little scene and then I was like, ooh, you know what could happen next? Ooh, that'll be awesome. I would stop so that I would continually be excited about coming back to it.
I wish I could do that.
It ends up happening when I write longer pieces because I've finally gotten over the nervousness of how bad the first draft is going to be. So it's easy to be excited when you're just taking all of the ideas and writing through them and being excited about what comes next because, you're writing at this point, I'm writing for fun. And so it's like, oh man, I can't, this is going to happen. And then of course, you look back on it and you're like, why did I do that? That's horrible. Have you ever heard Taika Waititi's, how he does script writing or writing in general?
No.
He says what he does is he writes it all out, just writes a first draft, just puts it all out there, gets it all out on the page, every single last thought of it. And then he puts it away for a year. And then a year later, he looks at the script, reads it, wonders who wrote this because it obviously wasn't me, and then throws it out and tries to rewrite the entire thing from memory. That way, he's cut out. If he doesn't remember it, it probably wasn't important to the script.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So that's a way to trick your brain into kind of collecting the things that are most interesting as a passive observer, and not the things that you enjoyed originating that maybe are that you're emotionally connected to for no good reason, right?
Yeah.
No, that's clever. I like that.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do that, though, to put it away for a year and then come back to it. But I have had that experience where, I put something away for good. It was in the permanent "we're good" pile. And then, I dig that stuff up and read it because I kind of want to see the evolution of me as a writer. So I'll go back 15 years and take a look at the stuff I was doing. And more often than not, I go back and go, oh, wait a minute, this was actually not that bad. Why did I think this was so bad? And to me, my biggest hurdle is my own internal editor, right? And the person in the corner of my brain who keeps telling me that I am not up to code, as it were. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to focus on Banish Your Stress, because I think that's the one that's most important to me. That's my biggest impediment, is the pressure to not be perfect on the first draft, writing through the bad words to get to the good ones. Because I think that was, who was it? Ray Bradbury, I think, is the one who I had heard said that you have to write like 10,000 words just to get to the good stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of words. But he was very prolific. Yeah. And who else? Stephen King is very prolific, right? And he I think he was on record as saying like the first couple 3,000 words he would write wouldn't be keepable, right? But that he would get. So I think, these are successful people. We should probably take them seriously.
Writing that much, I love those first drafts. I love banishing my stress, with that like first draft, like I'm just gonna flood these pages with as much junk as I can. I really do. And I think that it comes from the fact that I just love the world building of it. If I'm writing longer pieces, I just really, really like being able to like flesh out things and make up names. I mean, I primarily write science fiction stuff, and I write the kind of science fiction that's sort of along the lines of like, let's just call it what it is. I don't know how science works, so I'm more interested in the characters that are inhabiting space as opposed to, a lot of the high technical, super science driven. In other words, Neil deGrasse Tyson would not like my books at all or stories.
Yeah, I've heard of a delineation between hard science fiction and, I guess, soft would be the contrast there. And I think what you're describing is that softer science fiction. The hard science fiction would be like the Honor Harrington books, where the movement of the vessels is described in a way that is consistent with physics and uses momentum in a particular way. And like that's part of the experience is sort of imagining how that works. So yeah, that I'm not in for that as well. I'm really more interested in sort of inward-looking fiction where people have these sort of existential crises and they have to kind of dig themselves out of their own holes.
Yeah. I mean, I got to be honest with you. When it comes to Honor Harrington, it was a nail biter at the end of it because he was using those. He was explaining how these ships worked, and it's velocity and speed and rate and time and all this stuff like that. And I was moving through those pages pretty quick, and I was just like, man, I would need so much research to have to write this, and I guess I won't. I'm gonna write about spaceships going to warp, like.
Yeah, well, I mean, if that's not interesting to you, if that's work, I think if you were to write about it, it would come off as homework, and it might not be very compelling to the reader. So I commend you for having the courage to move forward away from things that don't interest you. See, I'm trying to build courage into everything that we talk about because the act of writing is sort of crazy. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Why?
I had a friend of mine. I had a friend of mine. I was talking about, getting back into writing and trying to submit some fiction to places, and the amount of rejections I was getting. And he was like, "I'm sorry. So you're writing now?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've always done. It was kind of the first thing I really wanted to do creatively." He goes, and you're an actor too, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, are you just not getting enough rejection in acting?
Yep.
And I sort of, and I laughed, and that laughter turned to tears and more tears.
And then whiskey. And that's how whiskey's made.
And that's how we make whiskey. So when you're doing first drafts, what is your progress? Are you a better first drafter than you were, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I used to have to wait for inspiration, and I'll tell you, when inspiration hits, it is like that flash of lightning kind of concept. It is awesome. That flow state that you get into, and you just, the world kind of turns off, and the only thing that you can see is what's right in front of you. And I write on a computer. I prefer to be at my desk in my office with my door closed. I have a nice big monitor. I have a keyboard that has clickety-clack sounds that I appreciate. And I just really, and I don't know how to type. I've always said this. I can do like 70 words a minute, but I don't know how to type. So I've been a hunt and peck guy, but I hunt and peck so quickly that it looks like I'm typing, but I'm not. For real, I'm not typing because I don't know where the keys are. I don't know where my hands are supposed to be, but I'll the keys are flying and it's great.
Yeah.
So nowadays, if I do sort of latch on to a character that I find interesting, usually that's tethered to something that is real that I can reference in my mind. Whereas before, 20, 25 years ago, I didn't have as much reality to tether this to. I sort of had this empty vessel or this paper thin character and an interesting setting usually, but more often than not, it was the shape of the language that was trying to carry the whole story. So imagine you have paper thin plot with holes. So you have a Swiss cheese plot and you have characters that aren't interesting. So they're almost like line drawings. So imagine if you drew, stick figures on a piece of cheese. That's basically, the story I was trying to tell. But with this really good language, like I was good enough to get an MFA because the quality of my writing was very strong. But the quality of my storytelling was not, because I wasn't telling stories worth telling. So that's why now I think my drafts are much better, because I'm actually trying to tell stories that are relevant and interesting and tethered to reality. And that makes it a lot easier to make progress,
Yeah. I remember, Rick Rubin, who is one of the biggest producers of the past 30 years of music. I mean, he's kind of produced everybody. He said that, Jay-Z has this magnificent ability. Jay-Z doesn't write anything down. Jay-Z hears the beat, constructs in his head, and then goes into the studio, and everyone knows who Jay-Z is, and rightfully so. But he says that Eminem is always writing. And when Rick Rubin asked him, he's like, you just do so much writing. What, tell me about it. From what I understand, Eminem said, I want to write so much that when I need to tap into it, it's already there. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I really, really taken away from that story. The thing that I've taken from it is I want to be able to try and latch on to that inspiration when it comes and write enough to make what's going on in my head come out on paper. And on paper, of course, means whatever's available at hand. I just got the biggest iPhone. I saved up a year's worth of catering tips so I could buy the biggest one that they've got right now, because I love writing on my phone. Mm-hmm. And living in New York City, it makes it very, very easy. If I'm on the subway, I don't have to pull out a piece of paper and a notebook and notebook and pen. It's always convenient. So that's I've always taken that story about Eminem and been like, how can I translate that into my life? Which is, if it comes along, just start writing. Just start writing whenever you can. And that's pretty easy to say. It's difficult, honestly, to do in practice.
Yeah.
I can't, sometimes at work, I can't be like, hello, everyone, I'm terribly sorry. If we could stop everything we're doing, the inspirato doth cometh, and I need to step away.
The muse attends.
The muse attends. I shall not be available for the next, let's be honest, 30 to 35 seconds, because that's about as long as the inspiration lasts. And that's the thing about it too, is Eminem's idea of writing so much so that he can tap into it when he wants to. I really want to try and do that more, because there are times when the muse doth attend, when it does come in, and I write and I'm like, I can't get to it now. This is such a great idea. And so I like make a note to myself of the idea, and then I can't tap into that later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
You lose that.
I agree. That's a mistake I used to make when I would have a really strong notion of something to write. And I'd say, "Ooh, yeah, that's good," but I'm in class, or I'm at work or whatever. Well, I'll remember it. It's such a great idea. I'm definitely not going to forget that. 2 hours later, gone. If you imagine it like a whiff of perfume, right? It's very strong at first. It dissipates very quickly, and then it's gone from the room, and all you're left with is this sort of memory of its existence, but you can't quite grab it. So, you're right about Eminem. I think I saw a 60 Minutes with him like 10 or 15 years ago, whatever that was. And he has this, process that's very envious. I'm envious of his process, because he is constantly writing things down, and it's snippets of thoughts, of fragments. And when he starts to construct things, he'll flip through these fragments and sort of select things that are worthwhile now. And so he always kind of recognizes, oh, these are snippets of things that may be useful later. I'll just put them here so I don't lose them. And that's a great way to think about that first draft, is to just get everything out, knowing that you can kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and get something good. And even if it's not a full story, that it's something that you can come back to later. And that's another reason why Stephen King's writing 6 pages a day. If you write in that vein, where you're not really creating a story or a movement, but you're just sort of collecting the pieces of your consciousness on paper, then that'd be a great activity to keep the pattern of your writing alive. Because I think that's where the death is. It's almost like, you start the new year with that resolution, I'm going to work out. And by the way, that has never worked for me. So you start with the New Year's resolution, I'm going to work out. It goes 2 or 3 days, and then you take that first day off. Oh, I'm tired today. Well, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm sore from the last time. I should give myself a day of rest. That's the smart thing to do. And that kills the pattern, and then you're done. So I think, Stephen King's probably right that you do need to, now I don't know if 6 pages is in everybody's, playbook, but certainly whatever you're comfortable with, just to feel like you have been productive that day. There is no reason not to do it every single day. Really.
Yeah. But also speaking to that, I think one of the biggest hurdles that I had to overcome, was I super stressed myself out about writing every day. Like, I went nuts in my journal. I was like, I have to get to my journal. I have to write ideas down. I have to talk about my day. I have to do this. I have to, every single day has to be writing. And then I got Kafka's Blue Octavo notebooks or something like that. I don't even know if I'm saying the name right, and I've had it for 30 years. But it's just as sort of like his journal. It would be like a sentence on this day, and then like a week until a couple sentences about what he ate for breakfast, And that was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to write every day. It really released me from that stress, because I was more stressed to put something down instead of being honest about what I was putting down, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I would just have like, bullshit stuff written in my journal. Like, did you know that one serving of Chef Boyardee macaroni and cheese is 320 calories? Like nothing real.
Right. And what are you accomplishing there? You're accomplishing the box checking activity of, quote, I wrote today, which is garbage. You didn't write today. You spent time transcribing your thoughts into a book, and with no purpose to use them in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and banishing my stress was finally understanding what I liked to write and how I like to write. And I think that that's the thing. I think that there are so many, like, this is how you should write. This is what you should be doing. This is how this person does it. This is how Stephen King does it. Mm-hmm. This is how George R.R. Martin does it. And once I sort of realized I needed to find my own direction in how I enjoy writing, man, it was such a relief. It was such a relief to get that.
Yeah. That fourth and final food group is curate your writing experience. And you've actually touched on this while we've been talking, which is that happy space for writing. Can I share with you my favorite writing space. I said earlier that it's my office, and that's true. But I am a weirdo. I have 2 desks in my office. One is for actual work because I have a hybrid schedule at work, and so I work from home with some regularity. So I need a dedicated space for work, but I also want to approach my writing as work. And so to trick my brain into doing it, I got a second smaller desk. And I dusted off an old computer. I thought that the poetic, justice of this was just too delicious to ignore. I wouldn't say hoard, but I do have a collection of vintage computers that I just can't bear to get rid of. Oh. And the oldest one that I have is the very first computer I ever owned, which is a Tandy 1000 TL. It was constructed in the late 80s. It is it is not a replica or a version of, it is the actual first computer I ever owned. And, it has a cathode ray tube monitor, with 12 colors or 16 colors. And it's a dinosaur. And when you turn it on, first of all, it still works, but when you turn it on, it makes this really pleasing, very loud fan noise because it's blowing air over the processor. And I just love, and then the keyboard, because it was a Tandy, they had their own, custom keyboards, in those days. And it's this big, chunky, clickety-clack keyboard that's just so satisfying. It almost sounds like a typewriter in a way. And I think that the same way that some people have a nostalgia for the hum and the sound of a typewriter, I'm a Gen Xer, this is my typewriter,
Yeah.
And they have about the same computing power.
Yeah. Yes.
But this thing has a 5 1/4 disc and a 3 1/2 low density. If for anybody out there who knows the difference, it's a low density 3 1/2. So finding a disc that would work on it was challenging. And I'm not joking. I had a box of maybe 50 3 1/2 diskettes. And for any kids out there who don't know what I'm talking about, when you click the save icon and it's that little rectangle looking thing, that's a 3 1/2 diskette. So it's the physical manifestation of the save button. But most of the ones that I had were high density, which came out, I think, in the early 90s or something. So they don't work. It's not backwards compatible. So I had to go through all these disks. And there were only 3 low density discs in the box. And I tried 2 of them and one of them worked. So I'm like, okay, I have my magic elixir. So look, to write on this thing is a joy, but then what do you do with it? Because I don't have a printer. The printer that used to be hooked up to it was a dot matrix printer. That's long gone.
Oh, man.
I know. And it made that really good.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. So good. But that's not worth it. And so I had this anxiety about, well, I can't use this thing to write for real. Because if I get it on a 3 1/2, first of all, the disc could fail and I'd lose everything. And secondly, how do I get it into a place where I can actually print it or edit or whatnot? So I figured that out too. I have an ancient laptop, from the Sumerian, time. Also the year 2000. And it is a Windows XP. And I bought a very inexpensive, 3 1/2 diskette reader off of Amazon for like $20. So I can take the disk out of the Tandy 1000 TL, put it into this disk reader that's connected to this Windows XP laptop. And then I can move that to the laptop and then move that file to a thumb drive. And then I have completed the migration of my thoughts. Now, why?
Right.
Why am I doing all of this? I don't know, because I'm trying to curate my writing experience. Damn it! Like I want to. Yeah. So that's what I do.
Yeah, it makes it right. It makes it fun for yourself. It's something that you look forward to doing.
I'm just trying to trick my brain into feeling obligated to do the work because there's nothing easier than not doing anything. Right.
Right.
To write at all. First of all, it seems like a really self-indulgent activity. Who am I to think that I have such a gift of thought that I need to spend time not only writing it down, but then shaping it to be a certain way so that these squiggles on the page will evoke an emotion in people I've never met and am never going to meet. I mean, what kind of, self-important nonsense is that? So like to get up the courage to do them, there it is, courage again. To get up the courage to do this, I'm going to go, well, if I write on something that's super old that makes me feel good, I'll want to do it. And if I write on something that is maybe going to break, the next time I use it, then it doesn't feel as permanent as all that. And so maybe that'll help me just kind of get the work done. And so far, so good. I mean, I haven't written a lot on it, but what I have done has been much better than anything I had done before. So I'm very encouraged by, if not the quantity, the quality of the work is improving because I've gone backwards in time, almost starting over. It's almost like a reboot of, well, if you had done it right the first time, you'd be further along. So let's pretend. Let's go back in time and let's pretend. Let's do it right. And so it's been really fun. It's been fun. What about you? I mean, I've always been really impressed that you can write on your phone. I can't do that. I can take notes on my phone, but I cannot write on my phone. So how do you do that?
Let's be honest here. I remember when I got the iPhone, it was the biggest thing that I had that I could fit in my pocket. I think it was the 8 or something like that. And I was like, you know what I'm going to try and do? I'm going to try and challenge myself to write a 50,000 word story because depending on who you talk to, that's either novel length or not. But let me try and write 50,000 word story on my phone. Try to really take advantage of the time that I'm waiting for a coffee from the barista or, on the subway, or I'm taking advantage of all those little moments where I wanted to see if I could write something. And I did. I wrote, unfortunately, this was around the time that Twin Peaks: The Return was on. So Twin Peaks is my absolute number one favorite thing in the galaxy. So I was like, what if I tried to do something like David Lynch and just went all whole hog improv? Like, what am I excited about? What's going to happen next? I don't know. Let's just dream. I was just using all of the David Lynch stuff. And I think I let you read a little bit of that book. And I think you were like, this is unreadable.
Sounds like
it was like I had so much fun. I had so much fun writing it because it didn't have a structure and it was just, improvising through the whole thing. But I loved it because I was just doing this sort of thing of like, this doesn't need to be attached to any sort of outline or plot. I'm just writing to write for my own enjoyment. And so I loved writing on the iPhone 8. After writing 50,000 words on it, my eyes were like, listen here, motherfucker, you ever do something like that again? Now I have the 14 Plus Max, which they have there's a very nice feature on Pages. I think that's the name of Apple's writing little program, where they have screen view to where the thing that you're working on becomes a very nice size on the phone so that you can it's a little bit more legible to read. And what I'm working on primarily now in doing micro and flash fiction, and depending who you talk to, I think I'm just going to generally say stories under 1,000 words. It's a lot easier to get to. But, I am trying to curate my space. I'm trying to do it wherever. I want to try and get to the point where I'm comfortable writing wherever, because one of the constraints I put on myself before I had my big breakthrough was the table had to be exactly this height. The keyboard had to be here. I had to have a coffee that was this certain temperature. I was putting all of these requirements for my writing space in front of me so that if I didn't meet those requirements, well, I guess I can't hold myself accountable if I don't write anything good. The biggest thing that ended up happening to me as a writer when I had my big breakthrough and got through that long stretch of writer's block was Tom Hanks. He has the Hanks Writer app. I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this.
You have.
It's a typewriter emulator. So one of the great things about that app was it got over my biggest problem which was I would work on the first two. I would rewrite the first 2 paragraphs of a story forever. And it's an emulator in that it's just like a typewriter. It's very difficult to go back and rewrite stuff. So it was always pushing me forward. And that's when I did, I think it was 2014, I did a NaNoWriMo, was that right? Novel Writing November, whatever that was called. I tried one of those. Of course, it took me November, December, and most of January to write a novel, but using that app as a typewriter on the iPad really helped me break through and finish something that I could say, hey, I did it. I actually wrote something. And so it's like anything. Wherever I'm at, I'm trying to write on whatever. Sometimes I'm writing small pieces on the Notes app. Sometimes it's in Pages.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the goal. I guess it's about being able to zone into what you're doing, kind of block out distraction. And some people, many people would need to curate their space very deliberately to be in a quiet space, maybe with their phone off or a place where they know they're not going to be distracted or disturbed. And that's another benefit to the Tandy 1000 TL. It is not connected to the internet. I'm sure it would like smoke and smolder if I connected it to it. Like I don't even know what would happen to this thing. But no, so I can't check, social media. I can't do anything other than turn it on and write. I mean, it doesn't even have a mouse, Tim. Like the only thing it can do is take copy. So it's a glorified word processor. It's fantastic though. I love it. This one time, let me tell you this real quick. I always like to have a computer nearby because I can't write with pen and paper. I can't. My handwriting is atrocious, and my thoughts come more quickly than I can write them. And I find that the act of physically writing on a piece of paper takes me out of the flow state. So I have to do it on some sort of digital device, and I can't really use my phone because I'm using my thumbs mostly, and so I've taken 10 fingers down to 2, or 8 fingers down to 2, and again it impedes the flow of the thought. So that's why I really need to be on a computer with a keyboard. But in college, in graduate school, I was an instructional assistant, and we had office hours that we had to be in a certain place. Mm-hmm. And it was a communal office. There were like 5 of us in there. We each had a desk, but it was this big L-shaped room. And I had my desk, and I thought of it as not wasted time, but time that I wanted to use more productively because I was just kind of waiting around for people to show up and talk about their quiz papers or whatever. So I convinced the IT staff at the school to put in a communal computer, but to put it on my desk. And nobody else wanted to use this computer because it was an old school Macintosh, which this is 1998, and this thing was already a dinosaur when they put it. So I'm really good at using old computers that nobody wants, remember, because I'm not a hoarder, I'm a collector. So, so I figured out same kind of thing where I could have a computer that I could write on. And I remember being at, I think it was a doctor's office or an insurance office. It was just somewhere where you sit in a waiting room and your life slowly, escapes you and you can't do anything about it. And I had this flash of inspiration. And I remember getting out a business card, flipping it over and writing down the first paragraph of a story that made it into my thesis, which was the second arc. And I think the opening paragraph ended with something like, they were in this boat and they had dropped an alarm clock over the side of the boat that was tied to, like an extension cord that they had because they were trying to find the tops of the buildings. And the line was the clock hadn't scraped the top of a building in 12 days. And I'm like, what is going on here? This is really interesting. And as a narrative hook, I really enjoyed that. I'll probably bring this up when we talk about narrative hooks down the road.
Yeah.
But I remember scribbling it on the back of a card. And then recently, like within the last 6 or 8 years, I found that card. Somehow, I think I had used it as a bookmark. And I took the book out and I found it, and it was a transformative moment because I'm like, wow, this is a thing that I originated that was super cool. And I didn't have to curate my writing experience. I was sitting in a waiting room. And I remember going into my office, that communal office with everybody, and I had this old Macintosh, and I'm like, I really need to make progress on this. So I popped in a disk and I started writing, and it was loud. There must have been at least 10 or 15 people in there at any given time. But for that hour of my office hours, I completely forgot that people were there. Have you ever had that experience where noise just completely dissipates and you're just alone with your thoughts?
Yeah, for all of the attempts for myself to want to be able to write anywhere when the movement strikes and take advantage of those times, I do, thinking about it now, have a space that I curate a lot where the noise is drowned out, where everything is silent. When I first wake up in the morning, I love it because whatever time I go to bed, if it's, 10 o'clock at night or if it's 5:59 in the morning, my dog, Awesome is his name. He wants up at 6 a.m. 6 a.m. He's any day. He's like, hey man, hey bro, we got to go. It's 6. So we kind of sneak out of the bedroom so that I don't wake up my partner. And I take him out, Awesome out for his first walk. And then when I get back and I've got that first cup of coffee, and it's just sort of like, I haven't been intruded upon by the social media yet, by the emails yet, by, the usual crippling depression that kind of sneaks into you. So it's sort of like a really great time that I love to curate for myself, where I don't put any music on. I sit there with my coffee, and then I just sort of start to think about whatever piece that I've been working on. And those are some of those times where I really do lose all of the noise outside, where it really is, where I get into most of my flow states. It's really weird. I love writing in the afternoon, listening to whatever tunes that I've got on, singing along, bouncing along. But also, sometimes, most of the time, I'm writing on my iPad in the morning in absolute silence. And I don't know which one I like more.
Well, I'll tell you, based on what we've been talking about today, if you can get either or both, you're in good shape.
Yeah. Right.
I used to do early morning. I used to wake up early on purpose, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, to carve out that hour or 2 hours of really quiet dead time in the morning. And I can't do it anymore. I'm getting to an age where I need the sleep. So I'm trying to find other times during the day when I can be, that kind of creative, and I'm still struggling with it. But whenever the inspiration hits, I can usually carve out that 30 minutes to an hour to just capture what it was that my brain said, this is important. And I try to at least get that down with enough flavor and enough context that when I come back to it, that I can at least start to write tangentially or even tell the story outright.